Welcome back to the deep dive. Some organizations, they just seem built on contradictions, right? Things that feel like they absolutely shouldn't exist side by side.
hmm
Today, we're taking a deep dive into one that maybe embodies this more than any other, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club.
Yeah, they live in this really incredible state of tension, a cultural paradox.
hmm
Because on one hand, you have federal agencies like all over the world
Right.
documenting them as one of the most organized, frankly, most feared criminal enterprises out there.
But then on the other hand, they're this instantly recognizable pop culture icon, almost mythical. You see the logo everywhere, they're romanticized, sometimes even glamorized in films and media.
Exactly. How does that work?
How does a group known for, coordinated violence, massive drug trafficking, these brutal international biker wars, how do they also have these, super sophisticated legal teams aggressively defending their trademark in courts all over the globe?
That's the core of it.
That's the paradox we want to unpack today, looking at the sources you've gathered.
And that's our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We want to trace that unbelievable longevity.
Mm-hmm.
How did they go from these post-war roots dealing with trauma to becoming this modern global force?
Right.
We really need to get into that core tension, the intense commitment they talk about, the brotherhood versus the undeniable reality of crime, and how that internal loyalty, that bond, has fueled their remarkable, their survival through adaptation, decade after decade.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, because to really understand the Hells Angels, you can't just start with the bikes, can you?
No, you absolutely can't.
You have to go back to the state of America right after World War II. It feels
Yeah.
like it was this perfect storm brewing.
The context here is just,
Yeah.
it's absolutely critical. You've got millions of young men, mostly veterans, coming home. They've seen and done things at the absolute edge of human experience. War, intense violence, but also this incredibly powerful camaraderie, life or death stuff.
And then they're dropped back into, what? Suburbia, a 9-to-5 job. The expectation was conformity, a quiet life. And for a lot of these guys, the sources make it really clear, it just felt suffocating.
Utterly. They were restless. They were searching for something. The adrenaline, maybe. The intensity, definitely. But especially that fierce, unshakable loyalty they'd known in their units. The kind you just didn't find easily back home.
And dealing with trauma, too, right? What we'd now clearly call PTSD.
Absolutely.
Right.
Deep-seated trauma. They couldn't just slot back in easily. They needed a tribe again, a shared language, maybe a hierarchy, a mission that felt vital, that craving for a tight unit, maybe even one with a bit of structured danger. That became the bedrock.
So out of that turbulence, that sort of post-war fog, the club gets officially founded March 17th, 1948, San Bernardino, California.
Yeah, initially just a local thing. Built on riding together, sure, but also on rejecting that mainstream life they couldn't connect with.
And the name itself, Hells Angels, it's not exactly subtle, is it?
Not at all. And it's drenched in this mythology right from the start.
Yeah.
Designed to inspire, awe maybe, but definitely fear, too. The debate over where it came from says a lot.
Like, was it from a specific World War II bomber squadron, one known for being particularly fierce?
That's one theory. The B-17 guys? Or maybe it was a nod to Howard Hughes's big 1930 film, Hell's Angels. The one that glorified aerial combat and daring pilots.
It feels like it could easily be both, doesn't it? A mix of real combat history and that sort of cinematic hyperbole.
Probably. By the time the club really started gathering steam in the 50s, that name already carried this specific flavor. Dangerous, anti-establishment, adventurous.
And clearly that flavor caught on, because it didn't stay just a California thing for long.
No, not at all. We see this really rapid, quite aggressive expansion, not just across the U.S., but internationally, surprisingly quickly.
Really? Internationally that early?
Yeah. Early chapters started popping up. You had one in Auckland, New Zealand as early as 1961, then London in the late 1960s. The whole structure of having separate charters, it allowed for this. Local autonomy, but under one central identity.
And with that expansion, they needed a brand, right? Something instantly recognizable.
Exactly. They developed this very precise visual language. It's absolutely crucial to their whole outlaw status. Everyone knows the basics, the winged death head logo, the red and white colors.
Can't miss it.
But the real, the core of their identity is in those specific patches, the specialized ones.
Okay, yeah, like the 1% patch. That one's famous.
It's the definitive statement. And its origin story is just, it's fascinating, almost like a piece of marketing genius, really. It came about after this incident back in 1947 in Hollister, California.
Ah, the Hollister riot, yeah. Big media splash.
Huge. And the American Motorcyclists Association, the AMA, felt they had to respond to all the negative press about biker gangs causing trouble.
So they put out that statement, trying to distance the good bikers from the bad ones.
Precisely. They basically said, look, 99% of motorcyclists are decent, law-abiding folks. The implication being, it's only that 1% who are the troublemakers, the outlaws.
And the Angels just picked it up and ran with it.
They absolutely did. They took what was meant as an insult, a way to marginalize them, and they wore it, literally, as a badge of honor. Putting on that 1% patch was like saying, yeah, that's us. We are the 1%. We're proud of it. We're outside your neat little box.
That's a powerful move. It instantly creates this us versus them mentality, solidifies the group.
Totally. A huge psychological boundary between them and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And it boosted that internal loyalty massively.
And they developed other symbols too, right? Coded stuff.
Oh, yeah. A whole fascinating and sometimes pretty chilling set of codes. Things only members or maybe their rivals would fully get, like the number 81.
Right. HA, eighth letter, first letter, Hell's Angels.
Okay.
Simple enough.
Simple enough, but then you get into patches that seem to signal something deeper. Something about their commitment to violence as part of the club's function.
You mean like the filthy few patch?
Exactly. Now, it's hard to get definitive proof, obviously. The club isn't exactly putting out press releases explaining their patches. But the widespread rumor, the understanding within that world.
Which they don't exactly deny.
Right. They certainly don't discourage the mystique. The rumor is that the filthy few patch marks members who have committed murder for the club.
Yeah.
Killed on behalf of the Hells Angels.
Wow. Okay. If that's even close to true, I mean, the existence of a patch like that, it tells you violence isn't just some random byproduct of their lifestyle.
Yeah.
It suggests it's formalized, recognized, maybe even like a requirement for moving up within the organization, a key to advancement.
Precisely. And this internal commitment to violence, it didn't stay just rumor for long. It moved very quickly into the realm of undeniable public fact, especially by the mid-60s.
Yeah, this is where any romantic notion starts to crumble, isn't it? Their reputation, their infamy. It wasn't just built on looking tough on bikes. It was cemented by some really specific, horrifying incidents.
Definitely. And a major turning point was the 1964 Monterey Beach incident.
What happened there?
Sources detail the gang rape of a young woman, allegedly by Hells Angels members.
Yeah.
It was brutal, shocking, and it just exploded into the national media.
Okay.
It thrust the group violently into the spotlight in a way nothing else had before. And the media reaction was immediate and intense. It basically created the template for how the public would see them for decades. Just unrestrained brutality, often sexual violence.
And the police investigations that followed, they started connecting the dots between the different chapters.
Yes, they started to reveal a pattern. It wasn't just isolated brawls. They found evidence of early systematic involvement in things like drug distribution, small-scale weapons trafficking, organized theft rings, and just widespread organized violence across California chapters.
But here's the weird thing. Despite this documented violence, the 1960s were such a strange time. There was this anti-establishment wave,
Right.
and somehow the Angels got caught up in it. There was this bizarre alliance almost between them and parts of the counterculture.
It's a really odd paradox of the era. The anti-establishment feeling was so strong, so pervasive, that for some people, particularly on the more radical fringes of the counterculture, the Hells Angels seemed to represent something pure, untamed rebellion. They saw them as rejecting society in a way they admired, even if it was violent.
And nobody captured that weird relationship or maybe helped create it more than Hunter S. Thompson.
Thompson, yes. His role is absolutely massive in shaping the Angels' public image, for better or worse. He embedded with them, rode with them for over a year.
For his book, right? Hell's Angels, A Strange and Terrible Saga. Came out in '67.
That's the one. And it's pivotal, because it wasn't just some sensationalist, look at the bad bikers piece. It was more like an early kind of sociological profile. He absolutely showed their brutality, their unpredictability. I mean, famously, they ended up stopping him pretty badly over a money dispute, which sort of ended his research period.
Right, I remember that part.
But he also offered this critical view of the police and the media. He suggested they were often exaggerating the Angels' power, maybe to justify their own crackdowns or sell newspapers.
So he made them more complex, not just thugs, but dangerous anti-heroes.
Kind of. He analyzed that compulsion to reject straight society. He gave their rejection of authority this almost philosophical weight, made it seem less like just criminal behavior, more like a conscious choice against conformity. It gave them a literary cool, a certain glamour.
And Hollywood jumped right on that bandwagon.
Immediately. Films from that same time, like Hell's Angels on Wheels in '67, they really leaned into that romanticized image. Bikers as symbols of freedom, the open road, conveniently ignoring the crime and violence documented elsewhere.
And this cultural acceptance, it even bled into the music scene.
Yeah, that's another strange twist. You see them associating with bands like the Grateful Dead.
The Grateful Dead hired the Hells Angels.
Bizarrely, yes, as security for some concerts. I mean, the very idea of counterculture icons hiring known violent outlaws for security, it just shows how weird that moment was.
But that whole fragile romantic illusion, it was about to shatter completely, wasn't it?
So absolutely. All that strange cultural interplay set the stage for the definitive event, the moment that completely destroyed any lingering positive image. Altamont, December 1969.
Altamont, even the name sounds ominous now, the Rolling Stones free concert. Meant to be the Woodstock West.
Exactly. A defining moment of peace and love. That was the idea. Held at the Altamont Speedway in Northern California.
But the whole setup, it sounds like a recipe for disaster from the start, particularly the security.
These sources detail this, and it's just,
Ah,
it's almost unbelievable. The Hells Angels were hired, again as security, supposedly to protect the stage area.
okay. For how much?
A proper contract.
Get this. Not for money, not for professional fee. The payment was reportedly $500 worth of beer.
They were paid in beer to police a crowd of hundreds of thousands. Yes. You combine a massive, unprepared crowd, rampant drug use everywhere, a security force that's not only aggressive by nature, but also heavily intoxicated.
On their own beer payment.
Right. And then you add the pressure of a huge rock show headlined by the Stones.
Yeah.
Failure was pretty much guaranteed.
What was the atmosphere like?
Toxic.
Yeah.
Immediately. The Angels were using pool cues, apparently weighted chains, lead pipes, just wading into the crowd to manage things. Sources document constant fights, assaults, people getting beaten near the stage all day long.
Just chaos.
Total chaos. And it all culminated in that one awful defining moment. While the Stones were actually playing, under my thumb, an 18-year-old African-American man named Meredith Hunter approached the stage. Reports say he had a gun.
And then
A Hells Angel, later identified as Alan Pissarro, confronted him and stabbed him, fatally, right there, in front of the stage. And it was all caught on film by the crews documenting the concert for the Gimme Shelter movie.
just horrific. Captured forever.
The legacy of Altamont is just immense. On one level, it felt like the symbolic death of the whole 1960s peace and love dream, the darkness breaking through.
Yeah.
But specifically for the Hells Angels, it was catastrophic for their image. It completely wiped out any of that weird counterculture goodwill they might have briefly had from Thompson or the Dead connection. After Altamont, in the public mind, they were just synonymous with deadly, uncontrollable violence. Period.
And you have to think, an event like that, losing any shred of outside acceptance, it probably pushed them even further inward, right? Reinforced that need for absolute internal loyalty and maybe stricter internal rules.
That seems very likely. Which brings us neatly to another crucial aspect: their membership policies. Specifically, their restrictions, because those rules directly led to the creation of some of their most bitter, long-running rivalries.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's a critical point about how criminal organizations sometimes evolve or fracture. The Hells Angels, throughout their history, have maintained a strict, well, a whites-only policy for full-patch members.
Seriously.
Historically, yes, that's been the documented policy for decades. And this exclusion, this refusal to admit members from certain racial or ethnic backgrounds, it created a huge gap. Because you still had other veterans, minority veterans often, coming back from wars like Vietnam, looking for that same kind of brotherhood, that structure.
But they were shut out by the Angels.
Exactly. So what do? They form their own clubs.
Ah, okay. So the rivals emerged partly because of the Angels' own rules.
Directly. The prime example, the most famous one, is the Mongols Motorcycle Club. Founded in 1969 by Hispanic veterans, mainly in Southern California. They formed specifically because the Hells Angels wouldn't let them in.
Wow, okay. That's a direct consequence.
And the Mongols were just the start. The list of major rival MCs is long, and the history between them is incredibly bloody. You've got the Outlaws MC, the Bandidos MC, the Pagans MC. These are the big players who constantly fight the Angels for territory, for control of criminal enterprises, for dominance.
And these aren't just like minor scuffles over turf, are they, when we talk about biker wars?
No. Forget minor scuffles. We are talking about conflicts on a massive scale, often global in reach, demonstrating a shocking level of, frankly, criminal sophistication and adaptation. These wars were fought with military-level strategy and sometimes military-grade weapons.
Okay, give us some examples. How bad did it get?
Well, we can trace the escalation. The sources point to early brutal incidents like the 1971 Cleveland Trade Show massacre. 5 members of the rival Outlaws Club were killed there, ambushed.
5 dead in one incident.
Yeah.
Back in 71.
Yeah. But the scale and the weaponry just intensified over the decades. And crucially, these wars moved well beyond U.S. borders.
Like where?
The Nordic Biker War is probably the most striking example of this international escalation. It absolutely ripped through Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland between 1994 and 1997.
A war across multiple countries.
Between biker gangs.
Between the Hells Angels and the Banditos, primarily. And this conflict basically redefined what people thought outlaw motorcycle gangs were capable of.
Also, what were they using? It went way beyond fists and knives, or even basic firearms. The violence was systematic, coordinated. The sources detail targeted attacks using car bombs. Actual car bombs detonated outside rival clubhouses and cities. Assassinations carried out with machine guns.
Machine guns and car bombs.
And perhaps the most jarring detail, the one that always stops people, law enforcement in Scandinavia confiscated anti-tank weapons during this conflict.
Anti-tank weapons like rocket launchers designed to take out armored vehicles.
Exactly. Military-grade anti-tank weaponry found in the possession of members of these motorcycle clubs during the Nordic Biker War.
I have to pause on that. How does a group that's supposedly about bikes and maybe some drug dealing, how do they even get access to that kind of hardware? It suggests something way beyond a street gang.
It absolutely does. It points to access to serious international black markets, connections to high-level arms dealers, and the organizational capacity to mobilize significant amounts of money to buy this stuff. The conflict saw bombings in major cities like Copenhagen and Helsinki. It was terrifying proof that organized crime on 2 wheels was now operating on a geopolitical scale, using tools of actual warfare.
That's staggering. But was that the worst of it?
Arguably the longest and deadliest conflict detailed in the sources happened in Canada. The Quebec Biker War. It was absolutely devastating and lasted for years.
Quebec? When was this?
It raged from roughly 1994 to 2002, almost 8 years, and it was primarily the Hells Angels fighting against a riot group called the Rock Machine MC.
8 years of open conflict. What was the impact?
It essentially turned parts of Quebec, particularly around Montreal, into a localized war zone. The death toll is just horrific. The sources state over 165 people were killed.
165 dead.
Yes, and more than 200 wounded. And critically, that includes numerous innocent bystanders, people killed by bombs meant for rivals, caught in shootouts. It was indiscriminate.
My God, what were they even fighting over in Quebec to justify that level of carnage?
It wasn't abstract. It was intensely practical, brutally so. They were fighting for absolute control. Control over the extremely lucrative drug trade, particularly hashish and cocaine distribution networks coming into the province. Also, control over organized prostitution rings, extortion rackets, basically all the major organized crime revenue streams.
So the Rock Machine tried to muscle in on the Angels' territory.
Exactly. They challenged the Hells Angels' dominance in Quebec, and the Angels responded with just unrelenting, maximum force, scorched earth tactics, essentially.
And these kinds of violent clashes, they didn't just stop in the 90s or early 2000s.
No, these flashpoints continue. Maybe not at the scale of Quebec constantly, but they still happen. You had the very high-profile incident in 2002, the Laughlin River Run riot in Nevada.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that in a casino.
Right inside Horace Casino in Laughlin. A massive brawl erupted between Hells Angels and Mongols members attending the motorcycle rally. It quickly escalated into a full-blown shootout. Guns drawn, firing across the casino floor. 3 people were killed, 2 Angels, 1 Mongol, dozens injured. It was chaos, caught on security cameras. Proof that even on U.S. soil and public places, these conflicts can explode violently.
So the criminal enterprise is undeniable. Drugs, extortion, money laundering, violence. It's all there. But here's the puzzle, right? If it's so obvious, why has it been so hard to actually take them down legally?
That's the major challenge for law enforcement, and it's a key part of their survival story. Despite decades of evidence, prosecuting the Hells Angels as a unified criminal organization has been incredibly difficult.
What was the first big attempt? I know the government tried to use RICO laws against them like they did with the mafia.
They did. The first really ambitious federal attempt was in 1979. They brought RICO charges against Sonny Barger, the famous longtime Oakland chapter president, sort of the public face of the Angels for decades, and dozens of other members.
And RICO. Just to remind listeners, that's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
Exactly. It's a powerful law designed specifically to target the hierarchy of big, sprawling criminal groups. The idea is to prove a pattern of criminal activity connected to the organization itself, allowing prosecutors to go after the leaders even if they didn't pull the trigger themselves.
So perfect for a group like the Angels, you'd think.
You would think. The charges were complex. They aimed to prove the entire club structure from the top down constituted a criminal enterprise under the law.
But it didn't work. The sources say it collapsed.
It ultimately ended in a mistrial. Despite a massive federal effort, they couldn't secure the convictions, especially against Barger and the top leadership.
Why not? Why did it fail?
It largely came down to the way the club is structured, or at least how they present their structure legally. Through, savvy legal advice over the years and deliberate operational design, they maintain this intentionally decentralized system of independent charters.
Ah, so each chapter is legally separate? Kind of.
That's the argument they make. Prosecutors really struggle to legally prove that Barger and the central leadership in, say, California were directly ordering or legally responsible for every single crime committed by some small chapter, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles away. They established plausible deniability.
Clever. And that failure must have boosted their confidence, affirmed that their model worked against legal attacks.
Massively. It was a huge win for them. However, law enforcement didn't give up. The 1980s saw a different approach, which was more successful, at least initially. Operation Rough Rider.
Rough Rider, what was that?
That was a major FBI infiltration campaign. Agents actually went undercover, successfully joined the club, gathered evidence from the inside over several years.
Wow, deep cover inside the Angels. That must have been incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. But it led to nationwide raids in 1985 and 1986. And the evidence they seized during those raids, it confirmed everything investigators suspected about just how sophisticated and heavily armed they'd become.
What kind of stuff did they find?
The seizure lists are eye-opening. Huge amounts of drugs, meth, cocaine, sophisticated surveillance and communication equipment, weapons caches filled with illegal firearms, including Uzis, and yes, you guessed it.
Not again.
More anti-tank weapons were confiscated during those raids too.
It's just recurring, that level of armament.
It tells you something crucial. But here's the key insight into their long-term survival. Even with successful infiltrations like Rough Rider, even with all those arrests in the 80s and 90s, the persistent difficulty in getting those broad, successful REO convictions against the entire organization meant they were never truly dismantled as a legal entity.
So they could take hits, lose members, lose assets, but the overall structure remained intact.
Pretty much. The failures in conviction, especially at the highest levels, essentially gave them breathing room. It allowed the Angels to just absorb the losses, regroup, and continue their aggressive expansion into new territories, often violently, largely unchecked by the legal system's biggest weapon.
Which brings us to maybe the most astonishing paradox of all, how they operate now. Because they aren't just surviving law enforcement, they're actively using the system against itself. They've become this surprisingly slick legal machine.
It's incredible, isn't it? They are notoriously litigious, aggressively defensive of their brand, their intellectual property.
Is their intellectual property, like their logo?
Absolutely. Their strategy is crystal clear. The Hells Angels name, the Winged Death Head logo, the specific red-on-white color scheme, the 81 symbol, even certain phrases associated with them, they consider all of it highly protected, trademarked IP.
And if someone uses it without permission,
They will sue you vigorously. It doesn't matter if you're a massive corporation or just some kid selling patches online. They treat that logo like Coca-Cola treats its brand.
that sounds completely wild for an outlaw motorcycle club, but the sources show they actually do this and win.
Oh yeah, the list of entities they've sued is amazing. They sued Disney
Disney. Over what?
over the movie Wild Hogs, which featured a fictional biker gang whose logo and name the Angels felt were too close to theirs. They sued the high fashion designer Alexander McQueen for using their winged death head symbol on clothing and handbags.
McQueen. Seriously?
Seriously, they've gone after Marvel Comics. They sued Toys R Us over yo-yos that allegedly use their branding. And yes, famously, they sued some teenager on eBay who was selling knockoff Hells Angels patches.
It's not about the money from the lawsuits then, is it? It must be about control.
Exactly. It's about absolute brand protection. If they let people dilute their trademarks, use their imagery freely, the power, the mystique, the fear associated with that logo gets weakened. And you could argue that image, that winged death head, is maybe their single most potent asset globally, more powerful than any gun.
Wow. Okay. But their legal savvy doesn't stop at trademark defense, does it?
Not at all. They've also become masters at turning the tables on law enforcement itself, using the courts to fight back.
How? I mean, suing the police.
Successfully suing police departments and government agencies for things like improper raids, illegal searches, maybe civil rights violations during investigations.
And they win these cases against the police.
They have. It shows an incredible level of legal mobilization. They clearly have access to very good, very aggressive lawyers who know how to navigate complex civil litigation. The sources mention significant settlements won, for example, over $800,000 collectively from various police departments in New York State alone, stemming from lawsuits over evidence seized improperly during raids.
$800,000 from the NYPD and others paid to the Hells Angels.
Paid to the Hells Angels or their members, yes. It's the ultimate act of adaptation, isn't it?
Yeah.
They've learned how to expertly wield the tools of the very system, the legal framework of the Western world that they spend their lives ostensibly opposing. They use it to fund themselves, protect their brand, and shield their criminal operations all at the same time. It's a masterful, if deeply cynical, strategy.
So this highly adapted, legally savvy, globally branded machine, what does it actually look like today in the modern era? It's clearly way beyond just a few bikers in California anymore.
Oh, vastly beyond that. By the 2010s, their global dominance was just undeniable. They had executed this very deliberate, very successful international expansion strategy over decades.
Where did they expand to?
Pretty much everywhere. They established charters on nearly every continent, pushing into places you might not expect, like South Africa, deep into Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union, and significantly throughout Southeast Asia, Thailand, the Philippines.
Antarctica, the only holdout, maybe.
Right. Probably a safe bet. But the modern numbers, they really paint a picture of a genuine multinational entity, albeit a criminal one.
What are the figures now?
Today, estimates suggest the Hells Angels operate over 600 charters. Think of them like franchises, spread across 66 countries worldwide.
600 chapters in 66 countries. How many actual members?
The estimates for full-patch members hover around 6,000 or more. But that number is deceptive. It doesn't include their vast network of associates, prospects, and, crucially, their support clubs.
Okay, you mentioned support clubs before, sometimes called puppet clubs, right? What role do they play?
They're absolutely key to the modern structure, especially for maintaining that plausible deniability we talked about. A puppet club is essentially a smaller, local motorcycle club that operates under the wing, under the explicit control or protection of the Hells Angels.
So, like subcontractors in the criminal world.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. They act as a buffer. The puppet clubs often handle the lower-level, higher-risk, more visible criminal stuff, street-level drug dealing, maybe debt collection, petty extortion, local muscle.
Which keeps the heat off the main Angels chapter.
Exactly. It keeps the direct legal liability for those day-to-day street crimes away from the full-patch Hells Angels members as much as possible. The Angels provide protection, maybe resources, definitely oversight, and in return, they get a cut of the profits and maintain insulation. It's a very sophisticated risk management strategy.
So, looking at all this, the history, the violence, the legal maneuvering, the global reach, what's the big takeaway from the sources?
The conclusion seems pretty consistent across the board. The Hells Angels haven't just survived nearly 75 years of internal wars, external pressure from global law enforcement, and massive societal changes. They've actually thrived. They operate incredibly effectively today as both things simultaneously. That internationally recognized cultural icon and a highly sophisticated, globally dominant criminal powerhouse.
Right. So let's try to pull those threads together for the listener. Synthesize those core themes we mentioned at the start.
Okay, 3 main things stand out. First, that constant central tension. The battle within the organization, or at least in its portrayal, between the idea of brotherhood and the reality of crime, drugs, and extortion.
How do those two coexist?
Well, the brotherhood, that fierce loyalty, the shared identity, the yes against the world mentality, that's absolutely fundamental. It's the glue. It's what attracts people and keeps the structure solid. But paradoxically, that intense, almost tribal loyalty is precisely what enables the crime on such an organized scale. They see themselves as a family, yes, but the primary function of that family, based on the evidence, is perpetrating illegal activities and aggressively defending their turf and rackets. The brotherhood serves the crime.
Okay. Theme number 2.
Their incredible knack for survival through adaptation. Think about what they've weathered. They survived the internal threat bloody wars against rivals like the Bandidos and Rock Machine, demonstrated in places like Scandinavia and Quebec. They survived the external threat, decades of coordinated efforts by law enforcement globally, including FBI infiltration and major Argo attempts.
And they survived by changing tactics.
Constantly, they adapted their methods, from escalating violence and using military-grade weapons when needed, to, more recently and perhaps more effectively, pivoting to become expert users of the civil legal system to protect their brand and their assets. They don't stand still. They're a constantly moving target.
And the third theme.
That inescapable cultural paradox. How can they be so feared, documented as criminals by governments worldwide, yet simultaneously be so? Idolized, romanticized. Their image, that patch, symbolizes this defiant rejection of authority that clearly resonates with a huge number of people globally, even those who would never get on a motorcycle.
They've managed their outlaw brand almost better than legitimate corporations manage theirs.
In a strange way, yes. It's a truly unique position.
So it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Tracing them from those restless post-war vets just looking for a tribe.
To this global, trademark-defending, heavily armed criminal enterprise with chapters in 66 countries.
We've talked about some shocking details, the anti-tank weapons showing up repeatedly.
The tragedy of Altamont that sort of bookended the 60s.
Their surprising success suing major corporations and police departments. Their survival isn't luck. It feels like a direct result of calculated strategic evolution.
Exactly. It suggests that for the Hells Angels today, power and survival might be less about just raw physical force, though that's still clearly present, and maybe more about strategic organization, management, really, both on the street and increasingly in the courtroom.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. Building on these sources, given this clear history of adapting, especially their success, using the legal system to defend their brand so fiercely, how much of the Hells Angels' modern global power, their continued success, relies less on the traditional muscle, the drug routes, the extortion rackets, and maybe increasingly more on the sophisticated management and legal enforcement of their brand? Is the power of that winged death head patch itself, protected by lawyers and trademark law across the globe, now actually the single most valuable, most powerful asset they control? More valuable than any criminal enterprise?
A fascinating question, especially for an organization that seems equally comfortable fighting biker wars and fighting in civil court. Where does the true power lie now?
Something to think about. We hope this deep dive into the sources gave you some real insight into the enduring, often terrifying, and incredibly complex paradox that is the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club.
Until next time, keep digging.